Welcome to Progressive Short Takes. I'm Joe Firestone, your host. In this short take, I want to talk about a big victory for progressives in Rhode Island. I'll start by sharing the screen with an article that appeared in Common Dreams. The Common Dreams article was by Julia Connolly. It appeared on September 11th. The headline is Bernie-inspired organizers and Rhode Island voters deliver, quote, crystal clear the message, unquote, with the progressive primary wave. No one is entitled to their seats, quote unquote, said Medicare for All advocate Cynthia Mendez after winning a high-profile race, and quote again, if you're not working for people, you will be replaced, unquote. State-level progressive candidates across Rhode Island celebrated victories Friday after 38,000 mail-in ballots were tallied in this week's primary elections, in which more than a dozen centrist and Democratic incumbents were rejected by voters in favor of challengers offering more visionary solutions. The victories of candidates including Cynthia Mendez, a Medicare for All advocate and single working mother who beat State Senate Finance Committee Chair William Conley, and Brianna Henrys, who faced homelessness as a child and campaigned on affordable housing in her state house race following tireless organizing by progressive groups established in recent years in the state. Reclaim RI, established in May by former volunteers for Senator Bernie Sanders' independent Vermont 2020 presidential campaign, celebrated the victories of four of its endorsed candidates, including State Senator Sam Bell, a Medicare for All supporter, who easily retained his seat despite being challenged by an establishment-backed Providence City Council member. The group led volunteers in knocking on, quote, thousands of doors, unquote, during the primary campaign with the aim of ensuring working families in Rhode Island have a voice in the state capitol. And four reclaim-backed candidates at Samuel W. Bell, at Leonela Felix, at Megan E. Kalman, and at David Morales, RI, on huge victories. Reclaim volunteers worked hard, knocking on thousands of doors in their districts. Together, we look forward to working hard for working people of Rhode Island. This was tweeted out by Reclaim RI. And the graphic has the headline, People's Champions Prevail, and there's a photo of Sam Bell, and of Leonela Felix, and David Morales, and Megan Coleman. And congratulations to all four. According to the WPRI, turnout was high for an election without a high-profile statewide or federal race. Election officials reported an 11.4% voter turnout, higher than in three of the last five presidential elections in the state. Now, that's amazing because that's an amazingly low turnout. and it's still higher than three of the last five presidential elections in the state. Anyway, progressives posited that Rhode Island voters were adamant about securing power for lawmakers who will fight for single-payer health care, a Green New Deal, and a state budget, which demand that the wealthiest Rhode Islanders pay their fair share to fund schools and public services. Rhode Island voters delivered, wrote Intercept journalist Ryan Grimm on Friday, quote again on Tuesday. They went to the polls, and it took until last night to finish counting the ballots. But once they had, something stunning emerged, an historic romp by the progressive wing of the party, which tossed out more than a dozen members of the allegedly mobbed up the right-wing Democratic establishment, unquote. 8 candidates won their primaries with backing from the Rhode Island Political Cooperative, RIPC, a group started after the 2018 primaries in order to form a strong progressive coalition in the State House, which Mendes described as being, quote, corrupt, unquote, overrun by sweetheart deals and controlled by, quote, corporate sellout politicians. No one is entitled to their seats, she said. If you're not working for people, you will be replaced. And the Rhode Island Political Cooperative tweeted, we won 8 races, toppling entrenched incumbents across the state, and we're just getting started. This movement that belongs to everyone who wants a better Rhode Island by universal health care, a hashtag Green New Deal, affordable housing, racial justice, and a $15 minimum wage. And there's a list of all the candidates who belong to the cooperative. Altogether, there were 24 candidates. The RIPC charges candidates monthly dues in exchange for candidate training, volunteer recruitment, policy research, and other services that the political parties with deep pockets generally provide for their endorsed candidates. By Janine Corkin, a co-founder of the cooperative who served in the state legislature from 2016 to 2018 and appears poised to return to the Capitol after winning her primary on Tuesday, expressed hope that following this week's success, advocates for working people can make their mark on Rhode Island's political system. And tonight is just the beginning, she said in a statement. We've got 16 general election campaigns for November. Then the legislators will begin working together to turn our policies into state law. But looking ahead, RIPC co-chair Jennifer Rourke, who lost her primary, told WPRI, quote, recruitment begins now for 2022. And by Daniel Denvir, host of Jacobin's podcast, quote, The Dig, unquote, and co-chair of Reclaim RI, told The Intercept that should they win November's general elections, the group's endorsed candidates will focus on defeating centrist lawmakers' push for austerity in the state budget. Several months into the fiscal year, Rhode Island still has not passed a budget, and lawmakers are waiting for the Republican-controlled U.S. Senate to send more funding to the state. I'm not incredibly optimistic that will happen, and so there are things we can do right here in Rhode Island. But Denver told Ryan Grimm on the Intercept podcast, quote, deconstructed, unquote. Quote, after a decade of huge tax cuts for the rich in this state, it's time to make the 1% pay their fair share and not gut funding to cities and towns and schools. And Governor Raimondo, our neoliberal Democratic governor, has already started taking money from the funding targeted to the poorest cities and towns in the state. So we think this election sends a clear message to those who currently are legislators in the Rhode Island State House responsible for this year's delayed budget that people do not want austerity. They want the opposite. Mendes also spoke on Deconstructed and expressed enthusiasm for the fight that lies ahead for herself and other progressives in Providence. We're not bought by the political establishment. We're not bought by corporate PACs. So able to look at that budget with the people we've talked to for months in mind. And so the budget will go under some deep scrutiny and there will be a major shift going forward. And Daniel Denver tweeted, people want to organize right now. In May, a small group of Bernie 2020 volunteer leaders in Rhode Island started Reclaim RI. That was just a few months ago, of course. This week, we helped win 4 state races for the legislature. We did that because tons of people stepped up to take charge of a new org right after joining it. And Jay Mamana tweeted, I was one of the @Bernie Sanders volunteers who started at the Reclaim RI. I've never seen an organization make a difference so quickly, and it is solely due to the hard work that everyone has put in the last several months. You can make things happen now. And Maggie Kane tweeted, the shift is happening and I am here for it. I would say the majority of my volunteers were under the age of 25. It is imperative their generation remains committed and involved. Voter files are mostly voters born before 1981. And A.J. Braverman tweeted, shout out to all the young people who poured their heart and soul into managing at RIPOL co-op campaigns. And there are a number of thank yous to other people on Twitter who worked for the campaigns. Denver issued a warning to Senators Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat of Rhode Island, and Jack Reed, a Democrat of Rhode Island, the 2 moderate senators from that state, noting that the progressives won in all sorts of districts across the state this week, signaling that voters are eager for representatives with far-reaching legislative agendas. Quote, Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse should be paying close attention to the just, clear message that Rhode Island voters have sent this week, an unambiguous progressive message, unquote, Denver told The Intercept. And quote again, every single state legislature in Providence should also consider themselves on notice, he said, and quote again, there are very few legislators safe from a progressive challenge. And this should be taken seriously, particularly by Sheldon Whitehouse. Specifically, it should be taken seriously that the voters in Rhode Island are not for austerity. This is particularly relevant to Sheldon Whitehouse, who co-authored a bill not too long ago with Mike Enzi, the Republican chair of the Senate Budget Committee, who is retiring, by the way. And in that bipartisan bill, he took the position of the deficit hawks, saying, okay, in an opinion piece he wrote, it is no secret that a vast majority of Americans disapprove of the job Congress is doing. Too often our political debates are characterized by hyper-partisanship rather than achieving meaningful outcomes for the American people. Nowhere is this problem more acute than when it comes to our inability to address our country's unsustainable fiscal course. He referred to the current the budget process, okay, is broken. He expressed concern over mounting debt, okay, and deficits. And he said, while process reforms alone won't solve our fiscal challenges, we believe that realigning incentives, creating a more predictable budget pathway, and encouraging active engagement in fiscal outcomes are steps in the right direction. Who knows, that might even lead to a strong bipartisan solution. So he wants to join hands with the Republicans to do bipartisan stuff. And he says our proposal, which was carefully crafted with input from senators on both sides of the aisle, is built on a 2-year budget cycle. The regular appropriations bill will continue to be developed and processed annually, but top line discretionary totals would be set 2 years out. providing more predictability in the spending process. Our legislation would also require greater involvement from Senate tax writing and spending committees to ensure that all corners of the federal ledger are scrutinized and that budgets are attainable. And then he talks about CBO and the Government Accountability Office assisting in this effort by reviewing portfolios of federal spending on a staggered 5-year cycle to help lawmakers identify ways to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of federal programs. And he says, to force Congress to consider the nation's fiscal trajectory, our bill would require the budget resolution to include long-term fiscal targets based on our national debt as a percentage of our overall economy. This measure is generally viewed as the best indicator of a country's ability to pay back its debts, and our hope is that this added emphasis will help set us on a more sustainable fiscal course. These targets will be backed by a new deficit-reducing special reconciliation process to help ensure that Congress adheres to its fiscal plans. So, what Sheldon Whitehouse is doing in the bill he helped to introduce, and in this editorial, is he's coming out directly for fiscal austerity and reducing the deficits and doing congressional financial planning based on a debt to GDP target, when it is well known by now that debt to GDP targets have nothing to do with public purpose and should have nothing to do with public spending, because the debt to GDP ratio is irrelevant from a financial point of view and from a funding point of view. It is only relevant from a political point of view because people like Sheldon Whitehouse consider it a serious matter. His bill would incorporate deficit reduction as a goal and would outline a year-by-year glide slope for achieving a debt to GDP target. We don't need debt to GDP targets to govern spending in Congress. We need public purpose goals to govern spending in Congress. Why? Because there is no monetary sovereignty problem for Congress. It does not exist. It is not real. It is not something that Congress should be doing. So, this victory by progressives should serve notice to Sheldon Whitehouse. Voters in your state are no longer interested in austerity budgeting. If they're not interested in it at the state level, they surely are not interested in it at the federal level. And they will probably not be interested in any senator from your state who wants to program austerity into the federal budget. That is what you must realize, Sheldon Whitehouse. If you want to continue as the senator from your state, you are going to have to do something entirely different. You'll have to be concerned about public purpose goals, such as Medicare for All, such as the Green New Deal. And you will have to acknowledge, besides, that your goals of doing something for the environment and increasing the effectiveness of healthcare and increasing coverage under healthcare are inconsistent and in conflict with your fiscal goals. Your fiscal goals would only shackle the federal government and prevent the delivery of your supposed goals on healthcare and environmental issues. You need to learn some economics, Sheldon Simon. Specifically, you need to learn some MMT economics. You have to learn that the federal government is a monetary sovereign and that the amount of its debt is not relevant from a financial point of view, and the level of its debt to GDP ratio isn't relevant from a financial point of view, and that we are nowhere near the level of federal spending where deficit spending is a problem. There's no current danger of inflation at all due to the collapse of the economy under COVID. Right now, we need massive deficit spending to recover from COVID, and we also need it to fulfill the public purpose goals that you say you share. Those goals are not going to be able to be served if you also serve your fiscal goals. Your pushing of those fiscal goals, therefore, has to stop. And you have to recognize what the voters in your state actually want from you. So that is my message for you. I'll now end this progressive. I see it's a not so short take. Sorry about that.